Previously, culture has been seen as the desired values in a group and basing action on the goal of reaching those values. This meant that the endpoint was the motivating force behind culture. This view originated from Weber's work that claimed that people yearn for ideal interests, such as being saved from going to hell, as well as material interests. Swidler argued that the values that had been described as the center of culture were just aspirations, and aspirations differ greatly from culture. In the example given about the culture of poverty, she argued that while people may have similar aspirations, they may not have the same skill sets with which to get there. She argued that those who grow up in poverty may not be familiar with the tasks or behaviors needed to reach their aspirations. According to Swidler, the skills people develop are a critical aspect of culture that can help explain behaviors. Swidler also discussed how over time, values and the desired end goals have changed, yet the way action is organized has continued. For example, within Protestant culture, the emphasis on developing one's morality has endured over time. However, the reason for doing so has not remained as constant. Swidler also disagreed with the idea that each decision that goes into an action is thought through and considered based on one's values. She offered the idea that logic behind a series of actions should be labeled as strategies of action. Swidler claimed that a causal element of culture is that it contributes to developing an individual's various strategies of action. Examples of these strategies that Swidler gave included turning to a family or friends when support is needed, or highlighting a particularly strong skill set a person may have. These strategies are meant to help people achieve their goals and aspirations. Swidler's analysis of culture included these three main points. First, that culture should be thought of more as a toolkit. The skills, behaviors, and perspectives individuals have learned, as well as their experiences, are their culture. Culture should be used to create strategies of action. This is the causal significance of culture. I chose to highlight these points in Swidler's article because I found them particularly interesting. I agree with Swidler's description of culture as a toolkit. We each develop certain skills and perspectives based on our environment. I also agreed with her points about decisions not being individually made on the basis of a person's values or beliefs. I liked her explanation that we create strategies of action that help us work through and make decisions about circumstances that may come up in our life. I found that idea much more realistic than the idea of analyzing every choice we make. I think humans act more impulsively than that, and the strategies of action that we develop and internalize contribute to dictating what those impulses may reflect.
Swidler describes the different influences culture can have on actions. She believes we develop these cultural influences from either settled or unsettled cultural periods. Greece is a current example of an unsettled cultural period. If you follow the news, you would know that Greece is experiencing economic turmoil. Greece right now has an unemployment rate of 26.5% and is on the brink of bankruptcy. Swidler would say this is an unsettled cultural period, and it will affect the actions of the Greeks in the future. Swidler believes that their long-held cultural views will also have to compete with new cultural views. The structural opportunities will determine which of these actions resulting from these numerous cultural views will survive long-term, and which will disappear with time.
Now moving on to Chapter 3 of the Smith reading. The chapter started off by posing the questions, how can we explain different degrees of religious vitality reflected in different religious groups, and why do some religious movements seem to thrive while others languish? Smith offered and evaluated 4 social theories of religious vitality. The sheltered enclave theory claims that religions, especially traditional Orthodox religions, survive and thrive when they are protected from modern advancement. The threats of modernization that are of concern include functional rationality, cultural pluralism, and structural pluralism. Things like technology, cultural diversity, expansion of media, and bureaucratic social organizations are things that could potentially undermine the credibility and security of a religion, as well as the attachment of its followers. The stronger a religion is, the more protected it is from modernization. The weaker the religion is, the more vulnerable it becomes. The chapter claimed that in an extremely modernized world such as the United States, evangelicals are demographically and socially guarded from threats of undermining. According to the sheltered enclave theory, this is why evangelicalism has persisted in the United States today. Also following this theory, the way to maintain stability would be to remain demographically and socially distant from modernization. Smith's evaluation of this theory disputed the idea that evangelicalism has been successful in America due to its distance from modernity. Instead, the struggle between the two perspectives may be a factor to its survival. Evangelicals, seemingly more than any other group, are highly involved in the political processes of the United States. There does not seem to be a connection between distance from modernity and increased stability. In fact, evangelicals today do not appear to be any more distant from the modern world than other religious groups. Additionally, Smith disputed the demographic statistics given for evangelicals of the theory, and thus the argument for demographic distance. The status discontent theory is based upon threats to or anxiety about a religious group's social status. These fears encourage religious activism as a way to counteract the declining status of a group. Additionally, religious identities and commitment become stronger and more consistent. Smith's evaluation of this theory disputed the causal effect between perceived threats and religious activism, once again within the case of evangelicalism in the United States. His data reflected no major or threatening decline to evangelicalism. Also, interviews showed that practicing individuals did not perceive any decline in terms of educational status, mobility, or economics within their groups. Their concerns were more about others and less about a potential evangelical social decline. Therefore, status discontent was not a major factor in their religious activism. This theory focuses on the micro-level demands and expectations that people in religious groups are held to. In short, strict religious groups are more successful and lenient groups tend to decline. Strict groups emphasize demands and absolutism about beliefs and perspectives. Lenient groups have more relativistic beliefs and are more accepting of different views and lifestyles. Smith's evaluation is less clear for this theory. He claimed that there was some validity to the argument as, on a broad scale, this theory does seem to be true. Stricter religions seem to have grown and persisted. This could be because demands placed on members could contribute to the growth of those religious groups. Looking at evangelicals in the United States once again, they actually strive to be less strict. They still maintain vitality. So it could be that while strictness may have some advantageous results, it may not be the complete reason for religious vitality. The competitive market theory argues that religious regulation and monopolies create lethargic religions, but that capable religions thrive in pluralistic competitive environments. Capable religions market religions to potential followers, and therefore religious participation is increased and strengthened. In fact, church attendance has actually increased throughout U.S. history. Religious vitality is attributed to, quote, unregulated religious environments that stimulate aggressive religious entrepreneurs in search of expanding market shares to promote more diverse supplies of religious products that satisfy ever-expanding markets of religious consumers, end quote. Religious weakness is attributed to highly regulated religious environments that do not promote competition. Capability is based on the skill and aggression of religious activists. Smith was most accepting of this theory. While his data could not prove nor disprove this theory, Smith stated that evangelicals in the United States did appear to have capitalized on a competitive religious economy. Its fluidity in creating entrepreneurs and its incorporation of Christian traditions into a unifying movement also contributed to its vitality, according to Smith. This means that wide networks can be established to reach new members and entrepreneurs. Also within evangelicalism, several religious and political groups share common ground, which allows for a greater pool of potential consumers. So here's the discussion question. Based on the two films we have seen so far in this course, do you see any of these social theories of religious vitality in the rise of the religious groups depicted? If so, which ones and in what ways?
In Chapter 4, Smith's main argument is that religion survives and can thrive in pluralistic modern society by embedding itself in subcultures that offer satisfying, morally orienting collective identities which provides adherence, meaning, and belonging. He believes that a person's moral orientation is determined by the social group the person associates with. He argues that even in a pluralistic society, a religion can thrive if its collective identity is clearly distinct from outgroups. Smith uses a series of 8 propositions to back up his argument. The first proposition argues that human drives for the meaning and belonging are satisfied by social groups. These religious social groups help a person determine who he or she is and what their purpose is. An individual's morals can change to reflect the collective identity of the group. The second proposition states that social groups construct collective identities to distinguish themselves from outgroups. An outgroup is any subculture whose collective identity contrasts the in-group. In order for a religion to be successful in our society, it must construct symbolic boundaries to distinguish itself from other subcultures, groups, and religions. The third proposition describes how religions have historically adjusted their beliefs in response to the social environment. Sociologists typically use the word accommodation to describe the modifying of beliefs that religions experience when exposed to social change. The fourth proposition states that now more than ever, individuals have more control over which religion they choose. Smith argues that this freedom of choice has allowed individuals to build stronger religious identities because they were able to choose their religion rather than being forced into one or only having one option. The fifth proposition is similar to the second proposition in that individuals and groups define values based on a reference group or groups who believe the opposite. This proposition focuses more on the fact that by constructing these negative reference groups, individuals are able to establish the beliefs, thoughts, and actions which are contrary to their own, which helps them become more involved in their religion. Proposition 6 states that modern pluralism promotes the formation of strong subcultures. Some sociologists argued that modern pluralism will lead all religious faiths to the same outcome: decline, disintegration, and obsolescence. Smith argued against this belief by showing that pluralism leads to stronger and more distinctive religious identities, which as a result has strengthened those religions with clear collective identities. In Proposition 7, Smith argues that conflict within a social group strengthens identity and solidarity within the group. When there is a disagreement within a group, it incites its members to commit to a side and bolsters their involvement for their respective side. The eighth and final proposition states that pluralistic modernity can increase religion's appeal. Modernity maximizes the different choices we can make, but it does little to tell us what choices we should make. Normative questions such as these are questions best answered by religion. Religion fulfills the needs and desires that aren't satisfied by pluralistic modernity alone. The discussion question for this section is, in our current society, do you believe that because an individual can choose any religion he or she wants, it diminishes the plausibility of the chosen religion?
Smith believes that intergroup conflict can strengthen religious identity and membership in each of the specific groups. There are mixed views within the different Christian denominations on whether Christians should support the Supreme Court's ruling on gay marriage. Pope John Paul II stated, "All Catholics are obliged to oppose the legal recognition of homosexual unions, and where such unions are given legal status and rights that belong to marriage, clear and empathetic opposition is a duty." A more recent statement from our current Pope: "The family is threatened by growing efforts on the part of some to redefine the very institution of marriage." On the other hand, there are groups within the Quaker religion, which is also a subgroup of Christianity, that support gay marriage. They released a statement, "As people of faith, we celebrate all loving relationships." This is a current example of intergroup conflict strengthening the identity and membership within specific groups, like the Quaker and Catholic religion. And this brings us to our discussion question. Smith believes that the strength of a religion depends on the distinctions from other religions. Think about how this idea can be related to religious reforms of the past. Do you think that religious reforms based on social issues like gay marriage inevitably occur as societies evolve? Do you think more Christians will follow the path that these Quakers have chosen in the future?